that the work of the government reaches all Guyanese everywhere. Now I'm going to jump straight into the program this evening because, as usual, there is a long list of events and a long list of topics that we discuss every week, and you would know, most people who follow me every week would know that we always run out of time. An hour is never enough, it seems, to discuss all of the issues and all of the matters in our country. So please help me in sharing this program. Now, on this program, Making the Case, and from its inception, we have always strived on this program to discuss the work of the government in a very factual way. And I've always ensured that when I come here to speak to you publicly, that I do so grounded in facts. We don't come on this program not because it's a television program or we're on Facebook to gaffe or to bluff anybody or to incite anything at all, except to bring the facts of the work of the government and all of our accomplishments. I also strive on this program to compare track records, the track record of successive People's Progressive Party civic governments, and compare it to that of the opposition. Again, in a very factual way, comparing track records to our government, a track record of our government, and measuring it to that of the opposition. And as you know, there is no comparison. But it is important that we continue to analyze our work, our accomplishments, and our historical track record of achievements, that we continue to analyze that in a very factual way, and that we continue to remind people of the ideology of our party and our government. So, apart from that, there are some events happening in our country. And yesterday, I was at the Artachon Conference Center. The Ministry of Housing had a house lot distribution exercise there, our flagship Dream Realize land allocation event, and it was our last event for the year. So it was a very big event, massive event. We distributed about 600 house lots there yesterday. And so this adds, and I said this to the people who were there yesterday during my remarks, that this is a bonus installment, the house lots that we allocated yesterday, to our annual target of 10,000 house lots. So 10,000 house lots annually, which would give us the total promised in our manifesto of 50,000 house lots. And this year, we have already surpassed our 10,000 house lot annual target. So yesterday was an important event for the ministry and also for our government, continuing with our track record in the housing sector. Housing sector has always been a pillar of our economy. PPPC administrations have always regarded the housing sector as very important and as a catalyst to ensuring that people achieve home ownership and improving and increasing their net worth. Now, I heard when I was there about the events that took place the night before with Mayor Ubraj Narain. And so I paused what I was doing because I felt it was very important to stop and to listen to the comments that the mayor made. And let me start by saying that I became very upset when I listened to him mostly because it is completely baseless. It is without merit and completely out of the blue. And you would recall right here on this program, I said it, I can't remember if it was last week or several weeks ago, but I said that as we approach local government elections, as we get closer and closer to elections, that the utterances from the opposition will become more and more insightful, hateful, divisive, and more desperate, because they cannot do what I am able to do here every week. They cannot compare track records. They cannot measure their track record against our government's track record. Even in opposition, we had a better track record than they had in government. And so they have nothing else to rely on. They can't speak of the work that they're doing. They are incapable of criticizing our policies on merit. They cannot find fault with our policies. They cannot claim that our policies are discriminatory, because when we announce a measure, be it a cash grant for school children, a measure for our pensioners, when we give a subsidy, when we remove a tax from water and electricity, it's across the board. Every single Guyanese benefits from it. Afro-Guyanese, Indo-Guyanese, Amerindians, everybody benefits from it. So they can't bore holes in that. So they have resorted to the oldest tricks in the book, the race card, and now, according to the mayor, religious intolerance. And this is new. And this is why I say that they're going to become more and more desperate, and the allegations against our government will become more and more baseless and more outrageous. Every single Guyanese who has a conscience knows that what the mayor said was, first of all, wrong, and secondly, it is completely baseless. Everybody knows that we live in a country that has religious freedom, our cultural freedom, our protection for ethnicity, all of that is enshrined in our Constitution. These are protected rights. These are fundamental rights. And we have never in the history of our country, and we have had some dark periods in our country, but we have never had a history of religious intolerance. So this is completely brand new, and it reeks of desperation. And like I said, completely baseless. Everybody knows, yes, President Ali is a devout Muslim. And that's commendable, because it is important to have a leader who is connected to his God. It is important to have a leader who feels accountable to a higher being, who has a conscience, who cares about people, and so who is grounded in morality and religion. That has always been important to Guyanese. But we have religious tolerance. So even if somebody does not believe in religion, they too are protected. Their choice not to believe in or practice a religion, their right too is protected, because we live in a free, democratic society. We live in a secular state. And we've never had a history of religious intolerance. And President Ali, and I said it yesterday too, you can find him, yes, in the masjid, but you can find him in the temple, you can find him in the churches, you can find him and his cabinet in all of those places of worship. You can find all of us celebrating and participating in different religious activities and festivities, and being amongst people of all race, all religions. It was President Ali who, for the first time, organized a national day of prayer. If you can recall, we had this event, it was a massive event at the Artichoke Conference Center some time ago after he became president in 2020. And leaders from all religions were invited to come and share so that all Guyanese can see real attempts at building a One Guyana. A One Guyana is far beyond, or we intend for it to be far beyond just bringing our people together and ensuring that we live in unity and that there is no racial discrimination. We are determined to ensure that any bias and all discrimination is removed from our society, including religious intolerance, even though we never had a history of that. We are also committed to ensuring One Guyana means that every single Guyanese has access to government services, that every single Guyanese is given a chance to excel themselves, is given a chance to share in the bounty of our country, and that every single Guyanese has a chance and an opportunity to develop themselves and to prosper in our One Guyana. So it is much deeper and goes beyond just uniting our people across the racial divide. We want to ensure that all of the resources of our country are distributed equally, and that every Guyanese feels proud of their homeland, feels proud of their country. And we go as far as encouraging Guyanese who live overseas to return home to help us to build the Guyana that we know we can have, and to ensure that every single Guyanese experiences prosperity. But you know, the mayor's comments are very convenient. The comments are very convenient because I recall in several years ago, during the tenure of the APNU AFC administration, in the early morning of Sunday, the 1st of May 2016, the mayor and city council, under the then mayor Patricia Chase Green, proceeded to dismantle more than 130 stalls at the Stabroek Market. I'm sure many of you would have now recalled that, but it was quite the scene when the Granger administration, APNU AFC government, and the APNU AFC controlled mayor and city council unilaterally moved to dismantle 130 stalls from people who have been selling there for 25 to 30 years, that were never removed by the PPPC administration, and they were allowed to sell there and earn a living. And the APNU AFC government, who many of them said that they supported during the elections, they proceeded to remove those stalls and to remove those vendors. So where was Ubraj Narain then? And the Shara Duncan, Sherrod Duncan was, as a matter of fact, he was the deputy mayor at the time. And he shrugged off the entire fiasco that went on there at the Starbrook Market. And some of the people said, and there is a Demerara Waves article, you can check it for yourself. Sunday, imagine a Sunday morning as when they chose to go and to dismantle these stalls. And 1st of May, a holiday, Labor Day, they chose to do this cowardly act. And so some were saying that they feel politically betrayed by a government they voted for. According to the article, a vendor was heard telling her colleagues that she had collected the identification cards of all her children and had escorted them to the polling station to vote for the coalition to avoid then town clerk Carol Suba from remaining in office because they would have been removed. That's what they're saying. But look what happened to us now. That's what was reported in the article. Another vendor said, Mr. Dijon, who voted for the coalition-led administration, said, not because you get a new local government, you have to cast us away like if we are dogs on the street. So this is the same people now, the same members of the APNU and the mayor, Ubraj Narayan, who so love the vendors now, which is very convenient. But we are not against vending. Our party or government is not against vending, but I think people understand what was taking place in front of the Georgetown Public Hospital in terms of the obstruction to the emergency entrance to the hospital there. And so people vend all over our country along the streets illegally. And, we don't go removing people from everywhere. We understand that people have to make a living, but there are times when you have to, when the public safety and the public health concerns are more important, and you have to give precedence to that. And so suddenly they care so much about the city, forgetting that their government wanted to impose a contract for a parking meter. You would recall the resistance that the citizens of our country put up against that parking meter deal, a very corrupt deal. It was an awful scandal, and every week we saw massive protests in front of the mayor and city council against this parking meter contract that would have seen parking meters installed throughout the city. And as a matter of fact, we saw many parking meters installed, although they didn't last very long and the company had to leave. But that would have seen heavy fees to park your vehicle. And you would recall during that time as well that the city used to be empty. The city used to be completely deserted and abandoned because people simply could not afford to park in the city. And the mayor and city council has never maintained the city. So imagine you had parking meters being put down in mud puddles, and that's where you have to pay to park. There's no proper parapets or parking for you to park, but they were charging, I think, something around $500 for 30 minutes or something like that. It was completely ridiculous, very expensive, a draconian measure, and they ran people out of the city. And when people can no longer come to the city and park and shop, then the economy will be in trouble, because the people who are selling, the retailers who have their trade to ply, they lost all of their business and lost all of their customers. For weeks this went on, I believe for months, until they finally ran the people out. And this was completely driven by the private sector and by ordinary Guyanese during that time. And again, the APNU AFC was in office at that time, and they have been in charge of the city council for over 50 years. And so no wonder the city is in the condition that it is in. You would recall also the complete economic devastation under the APNU AFC administration. I was driving along the road the other day and I remembered that under their government, an entire dog food industry was started because people simply could not find work. And it's true. They almost every corner had a vendor who was selling dog food. Everybody had to find something to do because they were not getting jobs. The economy was in crisis. People were not finding jobs. We could not find the president at the time. We couldn't find Granger. And people were not given answers. And then you had people, not only those who were not finding jobs, we had the coalition government sending people home, 7,000 sugar workers. They abandoned the rice farmers that they promised to sell paddy for $9,000 a bag. They broke all of their promises, devastated the economy. And then Granger told them about starting their own businesses and selling plantain chips and all of these things. So people got desperate. People had to find something to do because there was no economic opportunity and there was no bright future. The future was very bleak. And so this sudden care and concern for ordinary people and for vendors and so on is very convenient by the mayor, by Ubraj Narayan, and by the entire APNU AFC cabal. And so they have turned to the oldest card in the book, the oldest trick, the racism card, and now the religious intolerance. But what it is that they are mortally afraid of the progress of our government. They are terrified of what they see happening. They tremble when they see our government, our ministers, and our president can walk in certain communities that they thought was their stronghold. And they see people welcoming us, willing to work with us, people listening to us, trying to understand our vision for the future of our country. And people will listen when you're making sense. If you're talking nonsense or you go to people and you make commitments and then you break your promises, people will stop listening to you because you have no credibility. But that's reserved for the APNU AFC. That's reserved for the opposition. People associate them with broken promises. But people do not associate the People's Progressive Party civic government with broken promises. People associate us with progress. They associate us with prosperity. They associate us with being able, being competent, and capable of moving Guyana forward. And so people want to be a part of that. People do not want to be held back. People do not want to be kept back. People want to be a part of the process. And the more and more we reach out to people, the more and more they feel involved. And that's what One Guyana means. And that is the objective of our government. Yes, we have to plan for the economy. We have to roll out our plans and programs and our budgets. But we are ensuring that in doing so, we are bringing everybody along. Every single Guyanese. That is why you wouldn't find us in our offices all the time. We spend time in the office because we have to ensure that the administration of our ministries and our portfolios are taken care of. But you will find us in the same places that they say we are intolerant of. You will find us in the masjids. You'll find us in the temples. You'll find us in the churches. You'll find us in the bottom houses. You'll find us under the Benab in the Amerindian communities. You'll find the president everywhere, in every corner of this country. And he said he would do it. He said so when he addressed the parliament, in his very first address to the parliament. He said that he would do it. And that's all he has been doing since he became president. Keeping his commitments. That's all he's been doing. Keeping his promises. And so it's very upsetting to hear somebody as useless and as insignificant as Ubraj Narain criticizing our president and accusing him of being racist and being intolerant of other religions. And as a matter of fact, it is criminal. His comments were criminal. It is against our constitution. And so it seems like today the police investigated his comments and he's going to have to answer to the law. So the police are doing their work and we will watch to see the outcome of that. But it is important. So while, I was very busy yesterday, and everybody is quite busy in the government, ensuring that we achieve our objectives, ensuring that we stick to our agenda, and that we deliver our programs and so on. While we are very busy doing that, we cannot allow people like Ubraj Narain to say these things with impunity. We cannot allow them to say whatever they please and leave it unanswered. So we have to fight against that. We have to condemn it because it is baseless and it is, quite frankly, illegal. And so he has to be called out on it. Yes, we have to be focused on what we are doing, and we are very focused on what we're doing, but we cannot allow them to be able to say these things and think that there are no consequences. We cannot allow people like Ubraj and other members in the opposition to divide this country and to use their platform, to use their positions as members of parliament or as the mayor, and to go on social media platforms and so on, and to use that platform to incite hate and to sow seeds of division in our country, when we are working so hard to ensure that prosperity comes to the people of our country, and to ensure that everybody sees and experiences the transformation and the development that is taking place in Guyana. And we see how destructive they can be and how anti-progressive they are. And we see the work, what they try to do in some of the Afro-Guyanese communities like Den Amstel and Mocha and in Belladrum, saying quite frankly, we don't want development, and we don't want it from any PPP government, and we don't want it from President Ali. So they're quite comfortable with their jobs as members of parliament and as opposition leader, but they don't want other people to be a part of the progress. They don't want other people to develop. They rather punish their own supporters rather than to work with us, to lift people out of poverty, to ensure that people who are squatting get house lots and to be able to change their lives, transform their lives. They're resisting us everywhere we go, but we will continue to go. When the Ministry of Housing distributed house lots in Linden, and we were going there to build a road so that we could bring some order to the community there. They resisted. And they went out there, the member of parliament, Figueroa, went out there with the cameras and tried to say that the PPP government is breaking the home of Afro-Guyanese. But we don't want people to live as squatters. We are investing resources and time and effort and energy to ensuring that we bring structure to communities, that we are developing sustainable communities so people can live in a neighborhood, they can live in an organized way as opposed to haphazardly. And this is what squatting does. In squatting areas, people take up their lots haphazardly. There is no proper space for roadways and drainage infrastructure, and that's why a lot of these communities flood and so on, because people live in a very disorganized way. We want that to end. We want people to stop squatting, and people have no reason to squat because we are making house lots available for people, and we are making the investment in communities so that people can live in wholesome communities, in sustainable communities with access to water and electricity and commercial activity so that people can live comfortably. And that's what we want, and we're making sure that people can be able to afford a house so that they can acquire home ownership. So it was important that we addressed this situation with the mayor, and they also spoke about in his comments as well to the media. He also spoke about undemocratic. Imagine Ubraja or anybody in the APNU AFC talking about democracy and the PPP being undemocratic, when they have a history of rigging elections. And I was speaking a few weeks in a row about Norton's claim about the list being bloated. For those of you who were following, you would realize that he's no longer talking about a bloated list. The tune has changed already, which is very characteristic of the opposition. When they don't get their way, they, as you say in Guyana, they try a thing. You try a thing, it didn't work out. We said it wouldn't work out because what they were calling for, the Chief Justice had already pronounced on, and it's frankly illegal to wipe the registration, to wipe the register clean and to start over with house-to-house registration with a fresh list. So that clearly could not have worked out. So Norton, like I said, backed himself up against the wall, and so slowly the tune started to change. So they're not calling for, they're not speaking about a bloated list anymore. They have now changed their tune to calling for residency as a requirement for voting. And that, we have ventilated that again. We've ventilated that over and over, and we know the history of how residency was first a requirement and then why it was subsequently removed. We recall and we know of our history during the Burnham era, when we had overseas voting, and you had 70 and 80% of the population, according to the results, Burnham's results, that voted for the PNC and loved the PNC, which we know was the elections were being blatantly rigged, and more people voting than they are in the country, or more people voting than there are Guyanese living in Guyana or overseas. And so in 1992, we removed the overseas voting to ensure that, as a measure to prevent rigged elections. And so that was removed, and you had to come home and you had to vote here. So residency became a requirement. But then during the reforms of the late 1990s, 1999, 2000, that was removed. And so residency is no longer a requirement, but also you cannot vote overseas. You have to vote in Guyana. So you have to return home to vote, but you can live abroad. And we always encourage our Guyanese brothers and sisters who are living abroad to keep abreast of what is happening in our country. And if possible, we welcome you home, because there's a lot of opportunity here and we need people here. And who best to benefit from the progress and the development that is taking place in our country than our own Guyanese brothers and sisters who fled during those undemocratic years, those 30 years, many of them. Many of the Venezuelans who a lot of people are rejecting and claiming that we shouldn't accept in our country. When you sit and you speak to them, they tell you their history and they tell you how they ended up migrating. And almost all of them that I've spoken to said that they went away during that time. And imagine fleeing to a country like Venezuela. Imagine how bad things must have been in Guyana for you to choose to migrate to Venezuela. So those people who are coming back, they are Guyanese who would have migrated decades ago because of starvation and because of poverty and because they were fleeing a dictator and the dictatorial nature of the PNC. And they are coming back now because they feel comfortable and they feel and they can see, they witness Guyana on a path to prosperity. They see Guyana having a government that is welcoming and that is creating opportunity. And that is why people are returning home. So this is home for them. And we welcome people we welcome our Guyanese brothers and sisters with open arms. So Norton is calling for constitutional reform now. Constitutional reform that he wants, not necessarily constitutional reform that is best for the country. So recently, we debated and passed the amendments to the Representation of the People's Act, or ROPA, as we call it for short, ROPA. So we took this bill to the National Assembly, and this was a bill that had been in circulation for over a year, a bill that we have ventilated publicly. I've spoken about it personally many times on this program before it was debated and passed. We had consultations, many public consultations. The Attorney General, Minister Gil Teixeira hosted many consultations, and it was in the public domain for people to submit their comments and their suggestions on how we can improve the ROPA. But as you know, this was a result of what we witnessed in 2020 following the elections of March 2nd. And so while we had a very good electoral system, and because if we didn't have a good and a strong, robust electoral system, then we could not have gotten to a point where we ultimately got the correct results of the elections. So we do have a robust electoral system. That is why we could have gone to a recount, and the recount could have validated the results of the elections on polling day. And the statements of recount could have matched the statements of poll that were counted on the 2nd of March. So, but we saw officers at GCOM, we saw the CEO, Lowenfield, we saw the deputy CEO, we saw Mingo, and all of these GCOM officials and staff using their authority to try to rig the elections, quite frankly, and validating votes and running to the courts and raising all kinds of extremities and introducing new things to the system and it became an emergency almost. It became very, very urgent that we address some of the loopholes in the system. And we faced the challenges with these in opposition, such as you would recall the statements of poll. When we made our statements of poll public, we had Mingo not using the statements of poll, then the statements of poll being compromised because we were put out of the Ashman's building and nobody having copies of it, and well, copies not being made available. And so we, in the amendments, we proposed that the statements of poll be uploaded to the GCOM website so that every single Guyanese can see and can calculate for themselves. We put forward other amendments such as having adequate polling places, such as having polling places within the communities, also putting a cap on the people that can, on the number of people that can vote at each polling station, capping it at 400, so people don't have to be waiting in long lines all day in the hot sun or in the rain to vote. We wanted to make it more convenient for people. You would recall the challenges we faced with this particular one about inadequate polling stations, where on the East Coast, the night before the elections, on the 1st of March, some people still did not know where they had to go and vote. And the now Attorney General, Anil Nandalal, was there fighting to ensure that people knew where they were going to go and vote, and that people were not required to go and vote outside of their constituency. They wanted the people of Annandale to go in Paradise and vote. So we fought against that. People must be able to vote within their constituency, within their communities, and there must be adequate polling stations for them to go and vote. So measures such as these, which not only protects the integrity of the electoral process, but also makes it convenient for people to vote, which enhances transparency and accountability in the system. These types of reform they didn't want. These types of reform, they refused to consult with us. They went to one of the consultations, they walked out middle of the consultation, made no contribution to the consultation whatsoever. And then when you listen to them in the parliament, when they spoke, it became very evident that nobody read the bill. Nobody read the bill before they came to the House to debate the bill. You would recall the day we were there, we were considering the supplementary financial paper, and they spent 8 hours from 10 o'clock in the morning to 6 o'clock in the evening asking us questions about the supplementary budget. And they are allowed to do so, and we welcome all of the questions. We responded, all of our members of parliament and our ministers responded to all of the questions. They took however long they wanted, asked how many questions they wanted, and we responded. When we got to the debate on the Representation of the People's Act, Amanza Desir started off the debate for the opposition. And it didn't take us long to recognize that she didn't read a single sentence in that bill before she came to the parliament. Imagine a bill as important as this. They're the ones that are talking about rigged elections now. When they tried to rig the elections, they didn't get through. And now can't tell their supporters that we tried to rig and we failed. They can't admit that. So now they turn the tables. Now they're the ones that are promoting themselves as fighting for a democratic process. But here we were putting forward a bill with substantial enhancements to the electoral process, and they were not in support. They were not in support. They didn't even caucus before they came to the House. Amanza was proposing that the bill goes to a special select committee. In other words, she's sending it there to die a slow death and will never pass. And then you had Roysdale Ford. Imagine an attorney, a senior counsel, at the end of his presentation, saying that he does not support the bill. He did not support these amendments. Imagine amendments to enhance transparency in our electoral process and accountability. He said he does not support. And to make it worse, to make matters worse, you have to listen. We have to sit there and listen to them talk about everything else in the world apart from the thing they're supposed to speak about, which is the bill. These people do not work. And I'm not trying to be facetious by saying that, but it is true. They do no real work. They do not work. And this same Amanza Desir, you would remember her calling people mentally lazy. PPP supporters are mentally lazy. But from the moment she got up to make her presentation on the Representation of the People's Act, we saw who was mentally lazy. The moment she opened her mouth to speak, we saw who was mentally lazy. And because of people like Lowenfield and Mingo and Myers and all of these people that went rogue within the GCOM system, we obviously had to increase fines and penalties for people who attempt to steal elections as a deterrent. And so we proposed in that bill, now the Amendment Act, very stiff fines and penalties, jail time, for people who try to do what Mingo and Lowenfield and Myers did back in 2020. And in response to the penalties that we proposed in the legislation, this was Amanza Desir's analysis. This is her analysis of the fines and penalties. If I tell you, you would think I'm lying. You would not believe it if I tell you what her analysis of that was. So I want you to listen to her for yourself.
Mr. Speaker, I want to look at a few elements of the bill in terms of the context within which this bill is brought, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when we look at the issue of fines and penalties that the Honorable Attorney General addressed here tonight, we note, Mr. Speaker, the very draconian, sir, fines and penalties that have been placed in this bill. Mr. Speaker, these are matters that ought to be properly discussed. Because, Mr. Speaker, not only us on this side of the House have raised the objection, noting, sir, that what this does is deter qualified, competent people from participating and working with GCOM to administer our elections. Mr. Speaker, the honorable members on the other side of the House can heckle, they can say whatever they want to say. It does not change the reality that the fact is that this will serve to deter qualified, competent people from being employed with GCOM.
So, it doesn't deter competent and qualified people. It deters and disqualifies riggers. It's the riggers we're trying to deter. Riggers like Amanza Desir, riggers like Aubrey Norton, riggers like Valda, and the Myers, and the Lowenfield, and the Mingos. They are the ones we are trying to deter. How can you come to the National Assembly and argue against stiff fines and penalties for people who try to rig an election, and to impose penalties on people who may even formulate a thought? That's what we want to deter. People must know that these things have consequences. That if you try to steal an election, you will go to jail, which is the natural consequence of stealing. So, all of us and anybody who listened to that must come to the same conclusion that I have come to, that she did not read the bill. She has no substance. Every time she gets up in the parliament to make a presentation, she raises all kinds of issues, external issues, nothing pertaining to what we are there to do, nothing pertaining to the matter before her. They just come there and they talk whatever they feel like saying. And all of them, they're all lazy and all incompetent, and none of them like to read. By the time, imagine we had a list of speakers from the government side and a list of speakers from the opposition. And you know how the debate is arranged. One speaks from the government and then the opposition speaks. When we're looking for Aubrey Norton, we can't find him. The speaker calling, leader of the opposition, Mr. Aubrey Norton, the seat empty. Aubrey Norton went home. He just picked up his bag and went home. These people have no regard for the National Assembly. They have no regard and no respect for the people who elected them to be there and to represent them. We have to represent the government, and we probably gotta scrutinize ourselves because they're completely incapable of doing any real work. They have no interest in working. Can you imagine Susan Rodrigues just hopping out the parliament and Gail Teixeira would be looking for me? Because we don't operate like that. We do not operate like that. Madam Gail Teixeira is a very serious chief whip, and rightly so. We are doing the people's business. We are there to ensure that we pass legislation for the protection of our people. We are there to promote transparency, to promote accountability. We make ourselves available day and night. If we have to sit there 24 hours, we sit there without getting tired, and we do the work. The people of the country can go to bed and we are working. That's what they elected us to do, and we have to do the work. But the opposition, they can just hop out when they feel like. They do not come to a consensus when they come to the house. They don't sit and consult among each other. They don't decide, okay, We are going to the Parliament to debate this bill. These are the issues we want to raise. These are the enhancements we wish to propose. These are the recommendations we wish to propose. We will support the bill, but we will make these recommendations, or we will not support the bill, and these are the reasons why we do not support the bill. None of that happens. They just pick up themselves on the day of Parliament and come, take a seat. And when they get tired, they pick up their bags and they go home. They just walk out the place. No regard or respect for the sanctity of the Parliament, and no respect for the people who voted for them at the elections. They continue to disappoint their constituency, disappoint their supporters. No representation or satisfaction these people receive. And we must expose them. They do not work. All of them take the easy way out. They will leave the Parliament, but they will hop on the Facebook or hop on the television and swing the whole story and introduce all kinds of things: racism, religious intolerance, all kinds of madness they will introduce. Because one, they're lazy, and two, they are incapable and incompetent and unable to make intellectual contributions, to hold a piece of legislation, to read it, to analyze it, and to make a contribution when they come to the House. The Parliament for them is a joke. They clearly do not take it seriously. That's why they come up with all of these strategies. They break the mace, parade all over the Parliament, blow whistles all over the place. That's not what the people elected you for. The people elected you to go there and to use that platform to speak, to ask questions of the government, to ensure that the government remains accountable, to make contributions so that to bills when they are being introduced to the House and being debated and passed, so that we can have the best piece of legislation at the end of the process. If they can't do work in opposition, they're going to do work in government. They do not deserve a chance in government. They do not deserve an opportunity to get even close to power ever again. They lack ideas, they lack vision, and they do not work. So, I see my operator signaling to me that I don't have 5 minutes. I'm completely out of time, which is the usual thing here on the program. But I want to thank you once again for joining me this evening. I'll ask you, it's not too late to hit the share button so that this program can reach others. Thank you very much for joining me. It was a pleasure being here with you this evening. We are in December, in the Christmas season, so we don't want the APNU AFC to spoil the progress and to ruin this season. People are very happy. Public servants are happy with their salary increases. The people in the medical field are very happy. Our joint services, members of our joint services are very happy. And so we don't want anything to stop the progress that we are seeing in our country now. So I wish you well. God bless you, and I'll see you next week.